In April of 1841, Silas Ruddle made an announcement that stunned even the most hardened plantation owners in South Carolina. He was placing his daughter Catherine, a 28-year-old woman weighing over 260 pounds, under the complete authority of an enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross. Not as a caretaker, not as a companion, but as her owner in every way that mattered except on paper. White society in Colleton County was outraged, but they had no idea what Ruddle was truly doing, or what Ezekiel Cross would unleash upon Catherine in the months that followed. By November, Catherine's body had transformed in ways nobody could explain. 13 men were dead, and Cypress Grove Plantation had been reduced to nothing but ash and cinders. What truly happened between that enslaved man and the plantation owner's daughter? What did he do to her that left every witness terrified? Before we uncover the disturbing truth, subscribe, hit that bell, and drop your state in the comments below. Now let me take you back to where it all started. Spring in Colleton County came in with suffocating heat and humidity that made the very air feel like a solid wall. The Coombe River crept slowly through the low country, its dark water mirroring the Spanish moss hanging from live oak trees like burial drapes. Rice paddies stretched on for miles, their flooded fields worked by hundreds of enslaved people wading knee-deep from first light until dusk. This was wealth constructed on suffering. Prosperity wrung from human misery, all of it justified by men who had convinced themselves that cruelty was simply the natural order of things. Cypress Grove Plantation sat on 800 acres of moderately productive land. Its owner, Silas Ruddle, was not quite part of the county's inner circle, but desperately wanted to be. He owned 58 enslaved people, which made him wealthy by most measures, but barely qualified him as mid-tier in local society. The truly powerful families owned thousands of acres and hundreds of slaves. They spent their summers in Charleston and sent their children to universities up north. Their names carried a weight that could open doors or obliterate reputations with a single word. Silas had married Elizabeth Yancey in 1812, a union that brought modest land holdings and a respected surname. Elizabeth had been a practical woman who kept careful records and seemed far more interested in profit margins than social climbing. She died in childbirth in 1813, leaving behind a daughter christened Catherine. For 28 years, Silas raised Catherine alone while directing all his energy toward breaking into the inner circles of county power. He was a tall man, lean in the way of people who forget to eat when consumed by obsession. His hair had turned gray early, giving him a severe appearance that matched his cold disposition. In business, he was known as shrewd but honorable enough, the kind of man who drove hard bargains but kept his word. His daughter Catherine had grown up isolated, educated by tutors, never quite fitting in anywhere. By 1841, she was 28 years old and weighed nearly 260 pounds. Her body had swollen from years of medications prescribed by doctors who diagnosed her with hysteria and female nervous disorders. She suffered violent episodes where she would scream and hurl objects across the room. She had attacked her own father with a letter opener the year before, leaving a scar across his left hand. White society in Colleton County whispered about her with hollow sympathy. Poor Silas Ruddle, burdened with a mad daughter. What a shame, she had been such a pretty child. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew what Catherine had witnessed when she was just 12 years old, or that her madness was not madness at all, but a rational response to living among monsters. The letter arrived on April 7, delivered by private courier. Silas opened it in his study, expecting routine business correspondence. Instead, he found 3 pages on expensive paper sealed with red wax bearing a symbol he recognized immediately. A scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the mark of the brethren of the harvest. The brethren. 13 men who gathered under cover of darkness to perform rituals they believed strengthened the land through blood sacrifice. They blended old European traditions with beliefs drawn from enslaved people who understood spirits and power in ways white men never would. They believed the strong were destined to consume the weak, literally when necessary. Silas had been initiated in 1822. He had attended perhaps 40 gatherings over 19 years, participating in rituals that ranged from deeply disturbing to outright monstrous. The letter informed him he was in debt. $12,000, borrowed over years of gambling losses and failed investments. An impossible sum. Repaying it would require selling most of his land and every one of his slaves, dismantling everything he had spent his life building. But the letter offered an alternative, a demonstration of commitment from members in difficult positions. Silas would take his daughter Catherine and place her under the complete authority of one of his enslaved men. Not temporarily, not as punishment, but as a genuine transfer of responsibility lasting 1 full year. The enslaved men would hold total control over her person, her daily activities, her treatment. Silas would announce this publicly at a gathering of the county's prominent families, framing it as an extreme medical measure for his daughter's condition. The humiliation would be total. In a society where white women were supposedly precious and protected above all others, Silas would be declaring his daughter worth less than his own property. But if he agreed, his debt would be forgiven and the brethren would provide the financial backing to restore his position. Silas sat in his study for hours that night. He turned his options over and over. Bankruptcy would destroy him completely. The brethren had connections to every judge, every lawyer, every politician in the region. They could make him disappear entirely if he became a liability. Or he could sacrifice his daughter's dignity to preserve his own standing. The choice society had trained him to make. Property over people. Power over morality. He wrote his acceptance by candlelight and sent it before dawn. 3 days later, another letter arrived bearing a name and a brief history. Ezekiel Cross, age 33. Purchased recently through an intermediary from a Virginia plantation. Skills listed as carpentry and herbal medicine. Temperament described as quiet and obedient. What the letter did not say was that Ezekiel Cross had been selected for this purpose deliberately. That his placement at Cypress Grove was no accident. That he carried his own burning need for justice and the patience to wait for exactly the right opening. Ezekiel arrived on April 13th in a wagon driven by a slave trader named Henderson. The wagon pulled directly to the main house, which was unusual since most slave transactions took place near the barns. Silas came out onto the porch, shading his eyes against the morning sun. In the wagon bed sat Ezekiel. The first thing Silas noticed was his eyes. Most enslaved people kept their gaze lowered as a survival mechanism, but Ezekiel looked directly at Silas, his expression calm and measuring. It made Silas deeply uneasy. Ezekiel was tall, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders and lean muscle built by a lifetime of hard labor. His skin was unmarked by whipping scars. His clothes were simple but clean. His hands were large and calloused, but his fingers had a precision suggesting skilled work rather than brute force alone. Henderson climbed down and handed Silas the papers. Ezekiel Cross, as requested. Previous owner said he was quiet but capable. Your associates want you to know this one was chosen carefully. Silas barely glanced at the papers. He addressed Ezekiel directly. You understand why you are here? Yes, sir. Ezekiel's voice was deep and measured, carrying a slight Virginia accent. My daughter is unwell. You will be responsible for her care. Doctors have failed. You claim knowledge of herbal treatments. My grandmother was a healer, sir. She taught me before I was sold away. The transaction was completed quickly. Ezekiel was shown to a small cabin near the main house, set apart from the other slave quarters. He was given basic supplies and told his duties would begin the following morning. He was informed that his sole responsibility was Catherine's care, and that failure would carry severe consequences. Ezekiel said yes sir when required and was left alone. For the first time since his arrival, he allowed his expression to shift. His jaw unclenched slightly. His shoulders dropped. He sat on the edge of the bed and reached inside his shirt, pulling out a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a worn piece of paper with 3 names written in a child's uncertain hand. Sarah. Benjamin. Ruth. His wife. His son. His daughter. Sold away from him 3 years earlier to an Alabama plantation known for working enslaved people to death. He had since learned they all died within 18 months. Sarah from an untreated fever. Benjamin from an injury that turned septic. Ruth from simply giving up. A 6-year-old child who stopped eating because she could not understand why her family had been torn apart. And it was Silas Ruddle who had sold them. Not out of financial necessity. Not because they had done anything wrong. But because he had been demonstrating to the brethren that he could make hard decisions without sentiment. He had split a family apart like kindling for burning. Ezekiel had spent 2 years working his way south, deliberately getting sold from one plantation to the next, always gathering information. He learned about the brethren through whispers passed carefully between enslaved people. He learned about their rituals, their members, and their absolute belief that they were untouchable. He learned that when the opportunity arose to be sold to Ruddle specifically, this was his moment. He would have access to Ruddle's home. To his secrets. To his vulnerabilities. And sometimes justice did not come from courts or laws. Sometimes it came from patience and planning and being willing to become exactly as monstrous as necessary. He folded the paper bearing his family's names and tucked it away. Then he lay back, stared at the ceiling, and began planning what came next. His first day began on April 14th. A house slave named Judith, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, brought him to Catherine's room on the 2nd floor. She knocked reluctantly. "Miss Catherine, your father has brought someone to help with your treatments." A crash from inside. Something heavy striking the wall. Then Catherine's voice, slurred but venomous. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith looked at Ezekiel with sympathy. "She has bad days. This is one of them." Ezekiel opened the door and stepped inside, pulling it shut before Judith could follow. The room was large but dark, heavy curtains drawn. The air was stale, carrying the smell of unwashed bedding and something else. The sweet rot of mercury. Books were scattered across the floor. A shattered picture lay against the wall. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Catherine sat in a chair beside the cold fireplace, wrapped in a stained dressing gown. Her dark hair hung loose and matted. Her face was swollen, her eyes unfocused. Her hands trembled constantly against the chair arms. She looked at Ezekiel with confusion, then fear, then fury. "Who are you?" "I said no more doctors." "I am not a doctor, miss. My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help you." "Help?" She laughed harshly. "That is what they all say. Help, treatment, medicine. They mean poison. They mean chains. They mean silence." She rose suddenly, swaying. "I know what this is. He is punishing me again for remembering, for speaking, for refusing to forget." Ezekiel stood still, offering no threat. "What are you supposed to forget?" The question caught her off guard. Her anger faltered into something more exposed. "You do not know." "I know nothing, miss. Only that your father says you are unwell." Catherine studied him carefully, as though really seeing him for the first time. "You are not from here." "Virginia, originally, miss." "Do you know what happens in this house? What they do in the cellar?" Ezekiel's pulse quickened, but he kept his face neutral. "I do not know what you mean." "Liar. No heat behind it. Only exhaustion. Everyone lies. It is easier than truth." She sank back into her chair. "Leave me alone. Tell my father his newest torment failed." But Ezekiel crossed to the window and drew back the curtains. Sunlight poured in. Catherine cried out, covering her eyes. "When did you last go outside, miss? I cannot walk that far. I am too weak. When did you last eat without laudanum in it? The medicine is necessary. Doctors say so. What if the doctors are wrong?" Her hands dropped from her eyes. She stared at him, hope and terror colliding in her expression. "What did you say?" Ezekiel turned from the window. This was the moment. The first card played. "I said, what if the doctors are wrong? What if everything you have been told about your condition was designed not to heal you but to keep you manageable? What if your father has been poisoning you for years to ensure you never recover enough to speak about what you saw?" Absolute silence. Catherine's eyes went wide. Her trembling hands went still. For 30 seconds she simply sat there, her mind turning over what he had said. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Clearer. Steadier. "He told you." "Your father told me nothing, miss. But I have eyes. I know mercury poisoning. I know long-term laudanum use. Healthy women do not end up like this without someone working deliberately to make them that way. Why would you say this to me?" Suspicion crept back into her voice. "This is a trick. You are testing me. I am telling you I can help you become truly well. Clear-minded. Strong enough to walk out of this room on your own. But it will not be easy. Your body has depended on those medicines for years. Stopping will be painful. You will feel worse before you feel better, and your father will not approve. Then why would you do it?" Ezekiel met her eyes. "Because I have my own reasons for wanting Silas Ruddle to suffer. And the most effective way to make him suffer is to give him back a daughter who is sane enough to remember everything and strong enough to speak about it." The truth was dangerous to say out loud. But Catherine was damaged, not stupid. She would see straight through manipulation. Genuine common cause, though, she might believe. "You want revenge on my father?" "Yes, miss." "What did he do to you?" "He sold my family. My wife and 2 children. Sent them to their deaths for no reason except to prove something to men who measure worth by cruelty." Catherine absorbed this slowly. Then nodded. "The brethren. He sold them for the brethren." Not a question. "The brethren, miss. You know of them." She laughed, something unstable in it. "You will learn. Everyone learns eventually." She leaned forward in her chair. "If I agree. If I let you help me. What happens then?" "You get well, miss. And when you are well, we decide what to do next." I have my revenge to plan. You have yours. Perhaps they align." Catherine studied him for a long moment. Finally she spoke. "I want them all dead. My father. Judge Pelam. Reverend Crenshaw. All of them. Every man who ever stood in that cellar. I want them to suffer first. To know it is coming. To beg. And then I want them dead." The venom in her voice was startling, not for its intensity but because it came from someone the world had dismissed as mad and harmless. This was not madness. This was rage compressed by years of forced silence. Ezekiel nodded. "Then we have an understanding, Miss Catherine. If we are conspirators, use my name." "I cannot, miss. Not where anyone might hear. We must be careful." "Then know something, Ezekiel." Catherine's eyes glittered dangerously. "I have killed before. 3 people. House slaves who might have told my father about my lucid moments. I cannot remember exactly how. The laudanum blurs everything. But I know I did it. They disappeared. Their families were told they had run away. She smiled terribly. So if you are planning to use me and then dispose of me, understand that I am not a victim. I am something worse. Ice moved through Ezekiel's spine. He had expected an ally. Not someone whose capacity for violence might match or exceed his own. But he held steady. I believe you, miss. And I will not betray you. Good. Catherine rose, steadier on her feet than expected. Then let us begin. But I have one condition. When this is over, when we have taken our revenge, I want to die. I do not want to live carrying what I have seen and done. You will help me with that as well. Agreed. Ezekiel had not anticipated that. But he was fully committed now. Agreed. Then we have a deal. Catherine extended her hand. After a brief hesitation, Ezekiel took it. Her grip was stronger than he expected. Over the week that followed, Ezekiel began Catherine's treatment. He reduced her laudanum gradually, replacing portions of it with herbal tinctures. Valerian root for anxiety and sleep. Chamomile for digestive distress. Milk thistle to help her liver work through the accumulated toxins. The process was brutal. Catherine spent 3 days bedridden with fever, shaking, vomiting. Ezekiel stayed with her through all of it, holding a basin while she was sick, pressing cool cloths to her face, speaking quietly just to remind her she was not alone. When the worst passed, she was weak but clearer than she had been in years. The constant tremor eased. Her speech grew less slurred. She could concentrate on reading again. Then the real work began. Ezekiel had her walking short distances at first, from her room to the end of the hallway and back. It exhausted her, but he pushed each day a little further. He restructured her diet, bringing lean meats and vegetables in place of the heavy pastries she had relied on. He enforced strict portions, though she resisted, years of using food as comfort making restriction a hard battle. While her body recovered, they talked. Catherine told him about the cellar, about what she had witnessed at 12 years old. She described it in detail that turned Ezekiel's stomach, but he listened without interruption. She told him about the years of gaslighting that followed. Her father working carefully to convince everyone, including Catherine herself, that she was unwell, that she had invented her memories, that nothing she said could be trusted. She told him about the journal she kept hidden. Pages of carefully recorded dates and times. Names of late-night visitors. Sounds from below that had no innocent explanation. Ezekiel told her about his family. About Sarah, who sang while she worked and taught their children to read in secret despite the danger. About Benjamin, who at 8 could do mathematics that left overseers speechless. About Ruth, who loved flowers and picked wild blooms to brighten their small cabin. He told her how Silas arrived at the Virginia plantation with a buyer's warrant. How he examined them like livestock. How he agreed to purchase all 3 at a fair price, then changed the terms at the last possible moment, saying he only needed the woman and children, not Ezekiel. How he split that family apart for no practical reason. Only because he could. He smiled when he did it. Ezekiel said quietly, "That is what I remember most. My son crying and grabbing my leg. My wife trying to hold herself together, telling Benjamin to be brave. And your father smiling like the pain gave him pleasure." Catherine listened with newly clear eyes. "I am sorry. I know that is only a word. But I am sorry you suffered because of what my father is. You are not responsible for what he does, miss. No. But I am responsible for what I do next. And I promise you, Ezekiel, he will pay for what he took from you. They will all pay." The formal announcement was scheduled for April 29th. 41 people gathered in the Cypress Grove dining room for what invitations described as an important family announcement. The county's elite arrived by carriage. Judge Pelham with his wife Eleanor. Reverend Crenshaw with his daughter. Marcus Fanning with his family. Benjamin Lyle from the bank. The meal was elaborate. Oysters, roasted duck, multiple rice dishes, sweet potatoes, fresh bread, a towering cake for dessert. Throughout the evening, Catherine sat at her father's right hand, eating sparingly, speaking when addressed, volunteering nothing. Ezekiel served alongside the other house slaves, moving quietly, refilling glasses, clearing plates. He was invisible to most guests. But he listened to every word spoken, watched every interaction, filed away everything he learned. After dessert, Silas rose and tapped his glass. "My friends, thank you for joining us. As many of you know, Catherine has been unwell for some years. We pursued every available treatment. Doctors from Charleston, a specialist from Philadelphia. Nothing helped until recently." He gestured toward Ezekiel. 2 weeks ago I brought in Ezekiel, who has knowledge of herbal medicine. As you can see, Catherine is much improved. Clear, calm, more herself than she has been in many years. Polite murmurs moved around the table. Catherine kept her expression composed, though Ezekiel could see her hands white-knuckling the napkin in her lap beneath the tablecloth. This improvement, Silas continued, has led to a difficult decision. Catherine requires ongoing care more intensive than our household can provide in its current form. After considerable reflection, I have decided that Ezekiel will assume full responsibility for my daughter's welfare. He will hold complete authority over her treatment, her daily activities, and her living arrangements, effective immediately. The murmurs shifted. Confusion now. Several guests exchanged glances. Mrs. Pelam's face registered open shock. Marcus Fanning spoke up. "Silas, I do not follow. You are placing your daughter under a slave's permanent authority. I am placing her with someone who achieved what no one else could. My daughter's well-being matters more to me than social convention." "But surely," Reverend Crenshaw interjected carefully, "there are other arrangements worth considering. A companion, a trained nurse, someone more appropriate to the situation." Silas's expression hardened. "I have made my decision. Catherine agrees with it. Do you not, daughter?" All eyes turned to her. This was the moment she could refuse. Could expose everything. Could bring the entire structure crashing down. Instead, Catherine smiled. Small, controlled, giving away nothing. "I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been kind and his treatments help. I am content with this arrangement." Perfectly delivered. But Ezekiel saw what the room could not. The white knuckles on that napkin. The brief flash in her eyes that promised ruin. The evening continued in awkward conversation. Some guests left early. Others stayed to speak privately with Silas, their voices carefully lowered. Ezekiel caught fragments moving through the room. "Are you certain this is wise? What will people say? The brethren will not approve of this becoming public knowledge." That last came from Judge Pelam near the study, barely above a whisper. Silas's reply was too quiet to catch, but whatever he said made Pelam nod and clap him on the shoulder. By midnight, all guests had gone. Catherine retired to her room. Silas withdrew to his study. Ezekiel helped with the cleanup, then made his way upstairs. He knocked softly on her door. "Come in." She sat by the window still dressed in her dinner clothes, looking out at the dark grounds without turning. "It is done then. I am officially your responsibility. Property of property. How absurd. How are you feeling, miss? I want to burn this house down with everyone inside it. But we must be patient. Is that not what you are always telling me?" "Yes, miss. I agreed because I want them feeling safe. I want them to see this as nothing more than one of my father's eccentricities. I want them to forget I exist while we work." She turned to face him. Did you see their faces tonight? The disgust. The pity. They believe I am pathetic. They have no idea what is coming. And what exactly are we planning, miss? Catherine crossed to her dresser and withdrew a wooden box. Inside were pages dense with her handwriting. I have been documenting everything I remember for years. Dates, names, ritual descriptions, all coded to look like nonsense if discovered. But I can decode all of it. We have enough here to destroy 20 men. And will anyone believe us, miss? A woman newly recovered from madness and an enslaved man. No. Which is precisely why we need evidence they cannot dismiss. Real, physical proof. She drew out one specific page. I know where they keep their records. The Brethren maintains a ledger of all activities. Every ritual. Every sacrifice. Every member's participation. It exists to ensure everyone is equally guilty. My father mentioned it years ago, before he understood that I would remember. Where is it? In the cellar. There is a concealed room beyond the main chamber. I never saw inside it, but I heard them speak about it. That is where they store everything they cannot afford to lose. Ezekiel felt a mixture of excitement and dread. Such a ledger would be devastating. But reaching it meant entering the heart of the Brethren's domain. We would need to go in when the house is completely quiet. My father travels to Charleston once a month for business. The next trip is May 14th. He will be away 3 days. That gives us 2 weeks to prepare. We need to know every room, every hiding place. I can help with that. I have been thinking about this for 16 years. I know exactly what needs to happen. They spent an hour going over every detail, speaking in whispers below the level the walls could carry. Catherine sketched the cellar layout from memory. Ezekiel asked about guards, keys, slave schedules. When he left her room it was nearly 2 in the morning. He made his way back to his small cabin, mind moving fast. He was fully committed now to a conspiracy with a woman who was brilliant, damaged, and frightening in equal measure. He pulled out the paper bearing his family's names and looked at it in the candlelight. I am doing this for you. For Sarah. For Benjamin. For Ruth. For every person who suffered because men like Silas Ruddle believed power gave them the right to destroy lives. He blew out the candle and lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around him. Somewhere below in a cellar he had never entered were secrets that could tear apart South Carolina's most powerful families. In 2 weeks, he would go down there and find them. The 2 weeks passed in deceptive quiet. Catherine kept improving. Her weight came down. Her mind stayed sharp. She walked further each day. More importantly, she was translating sections of her coded journals for Ezekiel, filling in details about the Brethren that made his blood run cold. The Brethren was not a local thing. It was part of a wider network stretching across the South. Affiliated societies in Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond. Different names but always the same structure. Wealthy men who believed their power flowed from ancient traditions of dominance and sacrifice. They believe they are continuing practices going back thousands of years, Catherine explained one afternoon. European mystery traditions blended with things drawn from enslaved people. They twisted all of it into something that had no name for what it was. Justification for the unjustifiable. And the sacrifices? Not always human. Sometimes animals. But other times they take people who will not be missed. Enslaved people with no remaining family. Poor whites who wander onto their land. Once I heard my father mention a child. I cannot say with certainty whether he meant it literally. Where do the bodies go? The swamps surrounding every plantation. Things go in and are never found. Alligators finish the rest. And this ledger records all of it. Every ritual for 40 years. Names. Dates. Descriptions written like scientific observations rather than confessions. They keep it because mutual complicity is their insurance. Everyone equally guilty means no one can expose the others without destroying themselves in the process. May 14th arrived. Silas departed for Charleston early in the morning, taking his carriage and his personal manservant with him. He would be staying with associates in the city and was expected back the evening of May 16th, nearly 3 full days. They waited until after nightfall before moving. The house settled into its evening rhythms. By 10 o'clock the main house was still. They met in Catherine's room. She had changed into simple dark clothing that allowed her freedom of movement, her hair pulled back tightly. She looked like someone preparing for combat. "Are you certain, miss?" "I have never been more certain of anything." "Let us go." The cellar entrance was in the kitchen, hidden behind the pantry. The door was built to look like wall paneling, but pressing the right point made it click open, revealing narrow stairs dropping into darkness. The smell reached them immediately. Damp earth. Old smoke. Something organic and rotting beneath it all. Catherine saw his reaction. "You adjust to it. I wish I could tell you that you stop smelling it. But I would be lying." They descended carefully. Ezekiel carried a shuttered lantern giving off the minimum of light. The stairs were steep and worn, the wood moaning under their weight. After 20 steps they reached the bottom. The cellar was larger than Ezekiel had imagined. Easily 30 feet across, with low ceilings braced by thick timber beams. The floor was packed earth. The walls were stone and weeping with moisture. At the center stood what Catherine called the altar, though it looked now like only a heavy wooden table. But the dark staining on its surface and the grooves cut into its edges told their own story. Around the room were candle holders, clay jars sealed with wax, wooden boxes, and a rack holding black robes trimmed in crimson. Along one wall ran shelves of books and papers. Catherine moved through the space with the certainty of someone following a memorized route. She brought Ezekiel to the far wall, which appeared solid, and pressed one particular stone. Something clicked. A section swung inward to reveal a second chamber. The inner room was small, perhaps 10 feet square, and here the brethren kept what mattered most. The ledger sat on a wooden stand at the center of the room. It was massive, 2 feet tall and 18 inches wide, bound in dark leather with metal clasps. Beside it were smaller journals. Around the walls sat shelves of sealed jars that Ezekiel refused to examine too closely. "There." Catherine's voice dropped to a whisper. "That is what we came for." Ezekiel moved to the stand and opened the ledger with care. The pages were thick parchment covered in precise handwriting. Names and dates going back to 1800. Ritual descriptions recorded with the clinical detachment of someone noting agricultural yields rather than atrocities. He began reading, and with every entry his understanding of how deep this ran grew darker. These men had not committed occasional acts of violence. They had made it systematic. Regular gatherings every 6 weeks, their rituals timed deliberately to agricultural cycles out of a belief that blood fed the earth. They had killed at least 37 people over the years, probably more. Mostly enslaved people. But also poor whites. Indigenous people. Anyone vulnerable enough not to be missed. And there were notes about consumption. They had not only killed. They had eaten pieces of their victims prepared in specific ways, consumed during ritual meals they believed transferred power. "Dear God," Ezekiel whispered. "This is worse than I let myself imagine. I tried to tell you." Catherine's voice was flat and empty. "I watched them when I was 12. I watched them cut pieces from that woman on the altar. I watched my father raise a goblet and drink. Then I spent 16 years being told I had imagined everything. But I always knew. I never stopped knowing. Ezekiel turned pages looking for entries about his family. He found them in October 1838. 3 lines on a single page. Purchased family unit from Virginia. Woman Sarah. Children Benjamin and Ruth. Separated from male to demonstrate resolve. Sent to Alabama contact. Payment received. 3 lines. That was all his family's destruction had warranted in this record. We need to take this, Ezekiel said, voice tight with everything he was holding back. No. Catherine's hand landed on his arm. If we take it now, they will know immediately. We need to copy the most important entries first. She was right. But Ezekiel wanted to burn every page of it. Revenge required patience. Required being more deliberate than the enemy. They worked for 3 hours. Catherine had brought paper and ink. She copied the entries naming current members and describing specific rituals. Ezekiel worked on a separate document, building a list of victims with dates that could potentially be cross-referenced against other existing records. The work was exhausting, made worse by every word they had to read to do it. Several times Ezekiel had to stop, his hands shaking too badly to continue. Once Catherine left the inner chamber entirely, memory overwhelming her. But slowly, methodically, they built their case. They were so absorbed that neither one of them heard footsteps on the cellar stairs. The first sign that something was wrong was a sudden blaze of lantern light in the outer chamber. Much brighter than their single lamp. Ezekiel looked up sharply, blood turning cold. Silas Ruddle stood in the doorway. 2 men flanked him. Behind them in the main cellar, at least 4 more figures. I must confess, Silas said calmly, I am impressed. I did not genuinely believe you would find the inner chamber. Catherine rose slowly and placed herself between her father and Ezekiel. You were supposed to be in Charleston. I was supposed to be, yes. But I never trusted your miraculous recovery. So I made arrangements. I left this morning as planned, but I came back this afternoon. I have been watching the house all evening waiting to see what you would do. He stepped further into the room. The 2 men at his back sealed the exit. Did you honestly believe I would not anticipate this? That I would not prepare for the possibility that you might remember, might decide to seek revenge? You have been poisoning me for 16 years. Catherine's voice remained steady despite everything around her. And you expected me to simply accept it. I expected you to understand it was necessary. You saw something you were never meant to see. You were a child. You could not understand what you had witnessed. I could not allow you to destroy everything we built. I was 12 years old and I watched you murder a woman and consume her flesh. That was not a lack of understanding, Father. That was a reasonable response to witnessing evil. Evil. Such a simple word. Silas moved further into the room, his eyes moving between Catherine and Ezekiel. And you. Using my daughter to get to me. Filling her head with ideas about revenge. Ezekiel said nothing. He was calculating distances and odds. 7 men against 1, with Catherine in no condition to fight. The situation looked hopeless. Silas seemed to read his thoughts. Do not do anything reckless. I have no desire to hurt either of you permanently. But I cannot allow this to continue. He gestured to the men behind him. Bring them upstairs. We have things to discuss. They were taken to Silas's study and locked inside together. The room had no window except one high transom, far too high to reach. The door was heavy oak, locked from outside. The moment they were alone, Catherine moved to Ezekiel. Are you hurt? No, miss. But we are in serious trouble. Yes. Though not as much as you might think. She reached inside her dress and produced the pages they had been copying. I managed to hold on to these. He did not search me. Too confident. That will be his pattern. That will not save us if we are dead. We are not going to die. Not tonight. Catherine's eyes were sharp and calculating. My father will want to resolve this without killing me if he has any alternative. I am still his daughter. His blood. That gives us something to work with. Over the following hour they heard arrivals in the hallway. Voices gathering. The brethren was assembling. Then the door opened. Marcus Fanning stood in the frame, his face grim. They are ready for you. Come peacefully and you will not be harmed. They were brought back down to the cellar. This time the main chamber had been transformed. All 13 brethren members stood present, robed in black and crimson. Candles burned in every holder. The altar had been draped with crimson cloth. 13 chairs were arranged in a perfect circle, all occupied except for Silas's position at the altar's head. Ezekiel and Catherine were placed at the center of the circle, forced to stand facing Silas. The other members watched with expressions ranging from detached curiosity to open hostility. Silas removed his hood. Brothers of the harvest. Thank you for responding on short notice. We face a crisis. My daughter and her associate discovered our inner chamber. They saw the ledger. They were in the process of copying entries when I intervened. He gestured to the two of them standing in the ring of robed men. Judge Pelham spoke immediately. Then they must be permanently silenced. This is not complicated. I disagree. Silas raised a hand. My daughter is blood. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other options first. And the men represent something more useful than a problem. What opportunity could this possibly present? Reverend Crenshaw asked. The chance to test something I have long believed. That a person can be brought into our work through their own hatred if it is channeled correctly. Silas turned to Ezekiel. You want revenge against me. You want to dismantle everything I built because of what I took from your family. I understand that impulse entirely. But what if I offered you a different kind of revenge? A more meaningful one. I do not follow you, Ezekiel said carefully. I am offering you association. Not membership in the full sense. The Brethren does not accept men of color as full members. But association. You would attend our gatherings, take part in our rituals, and in exchange I would give you what you want most. My family is dead. You cannot give me back what I want. No. But I can give you what comes closest. Revenge against the people who killed them. The plantation owner in Alabama who worked your wife and children into their graves. His name is Edward Gaines. He has no connection to the Brethren. No protection from us. If you join us, prove your loyalty, I will give you everything you need to destroy him. Money, intelligence, whatever it takes to make him suffer the way you have suffered. The offer hung in the air between them, grotesque in its precision. Join the men responsible for destroying his family in order to take revenge on another monster. And if I refuse? Then you and Catherine both die tonight. Your bodies go into the swamp. No one will ever ask the right questions. The pages Catherine was copying will be burned. Her journals destroyed. Everything continues exactly as it always has. Silas spread his hands. But if you accept, you both live. You get your revenge. All it costs is your soul. Ezekiel looked at Catherine. Her face was pale. But she gave him the smallest possible shake of her head. Do not do it. Whatever happens, do not become them. But Ezekiel was already thinking past her warning. Thinking about accepting, about getting inside their organization, about gathering more evidence, about buying time. He looked back at Silas. What happens to her? She returns to her room. Resumes her medications. Forgets what she has seen. No. Catherine's voice cut across the chamber like a blade. I will not forget again. I will not be silenced. Kill me if you choose to, Father. But I will not pretend I do not know what you are. Silas's expression closed over. Then you have made your choice. Wait. Ezekiel spoke quickly. I accept. But with one condition. Catherine goes free. Not back to her room. Genuinely free. Let her leave this house. Leave South Carolina. Give her the money to build something new. If you do that, I will join you. Several Brethren members shook their heads. But Judge Pelham spoke again. The man has a point. The girl is already broken. Even if she were to speak, who would believe her? But a man willing to join us in exchange for complicity, that proves something. It demonstrates our reach extends even to those who hate us most. Silas considered this for a long moment. Finally he nodded. Very well. Catherine will be sent north. I have associates in Philadelphia who will take her in. She will be given a new name and a stipend to live on. But she can never return to South Carolina. She can never contact anyone from her former life. As far as everyone here is concerned, she will be dead. Agreed. Catherine stared at Ezekiel. No. I will not leave you two. Agreed, Ezekiel said again, cutting her off. She goes free. I join you. Then we have our arrangement. Silas turned to address the others. Catherine leaves tomorrow. Ezekiel's initiation will take place in 3 weeks at the next regular gathering. Until then he remains at Cypress Grove under close watch. If he attempts to leave or contact anyone outside, the agreement is void and both of them die. Understood. Ezekiel nodded. Catherine looked as though she wanted to tear the room apart. But Ezekiel caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Trust me. Catherine left the next morning. A closed carriage took her away at first light. Ezekiel watched from his cabin window as it rolled down the long drive and disappeared into the trees. She had not been allowed to say goodbye. He had not been permitted to speak with her after the confrontation in the cellar. But as she was escorted past the night before, she had looked back at him once. And in her expression he had seen something that kept him steady. She understood. She knew he had not truly surrendered. She knew this was strategy, not defeat. The question was whether she would actually go to Philadelphia. Or whether she had plans of her own. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Ezekiel's life. 2 overseers followed him everywhere. He was not permitted to leave the plantation grounds. He was given pointless work to fill his hours. Tasks that accomplished nothing but kept him occupied and visible. But he was also given access to the main house. To Silas's study. To the cellar where the next gathering would take place. They were watching him, but they were also testing him. Waiting to see if he would run, if he would attempt sabotage, if he would betray what he was actually planning. Ezekiel did neither. He played the role of a defeated man who had made a cold pragmatic choice in order to survive. He was quiet, obedient, asked nothing, caused nothing. But he was memorizing everything. The house's daily rhythms. Which enslaved people might be trusted with a secret? Which overseers were the most brutal? Which Brethren members visited regularly? He was constructing a mental map of every weakness in the structure around him. And at night, alone in his cabin, he confronted what was coming. His initiation would demand participation in their rituals. They would want to make him complicit in something he could never undo. Something that would ensure he could never expose them without destroying himself in the process. He thought carefully about how far he was willing to go. What lines he would not cross regardless of what revenge demanded. Whether there was any act so terrible that justice could not justify it. He did not arrive at satisfying answers. On June 2nd, the night before his initiation, Silas came alone to his cabin. After midnight, Ezekiel woke to knocking and opened the door to find his owner standing there without anyone accompanying him. "May I come in?" Ezekiel stepped aside. Silas entered and looked around the bare room. Finally he spoke. "Tomorrow you become one of us." "Not fully. Never fully. But enough. I want you to understand what that means." "I understand what I agreed to." "Do you?" "Truly." Silas settled uninvited into the single chair. "The Brethren has existed for 43 years. In that time we have never lost a member to exposure. Not once. Do you know why? Because everyone is equally guilty. That is part of it. But also because we look after our own. A man joins the Brethren and suddenly opportunities appear that were not there before. Business doors open. Legal difficulties dissolve. Enemies find themselves facing unexpected problems. We are not simply a society, Ezekiel. We are a network of power that extends across the entire South. Once you are inside that network, even as an associate, you will have access to things you cannot currently imagine. And in exchange I help you murder people." Silas did not flinch. "In exchange you help us maintain the natural order. The strong over the weak. The powerful over the powerless. That is how the world has always functioned. We simply acknowledge it honestly and turn it to our advantage. You destroyed my family to demonstrate your commitment to that order. I did. And I would make the same choice again. Because sentiment is a weakness. Love is a weakness. The moment you allow yourself to value individuals more than power, you have already lost everything." Silas leaned forward. "But here is what I need you to understand. Your family is gone. Nothing you do from this point forward changes that. But you can ensure their deaths amounted to something. You can use what the Brethren offers to prevent other families from suffering the same end. You can work from within to push for less brutal treatment. To advocate for better conditions. You will have a voice that carries weight." It was almost convincing. The idea of Ezekiel as some kind of reformer from the inside, using his position to protect others. Almost. But he understood it for what it was. The moment he participated in their rituals, he would be compromised. The moment he accepted their power, it would begin corrupting him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to succeed in what you are agreeing to. Because having you as an ally is worth more to me than having you as an enemy. Because I killed your family, but I do not want to kill you." Silas rose from the chair. "Tomorrow night you will be asked to do something difficult. Something designed to test whether your commitment is genuine. I am telling you now. Whatever you are asked to do, do it. Do not hesitate. Do not show any weakness. Because if you fail that test, both you and Catherine die. Yes, I know she is not in Philadelphia. I know she is hiding somewhere making her own plans. But I have people looking for her. The moment she surfaces, if you have not proven yourself to the Brethren's satisfaction, she will be found and she will be killed. Do you understand?" Ice flooded through Ezekiel's chest. Catherine was alive. But she was in danger. And everything that happened tomorrow would determine whether she stayed that way. "I understand," he said quietly. Silas nodded and left without another word. Ezekiel sat alone in the dark, turning over the impossible position he was in. He had to participate in something monstrous tomorrow. Had to satisfy monsters. Had to become complicit in evil. Unless he found the third option. The one that neither Silas nor the Brethren had considered. He took out the paper with his family's names and held it in the moonlight coming through the window. "Forgive me," he whispered. "For what I am about to do. For what I have to become. I promise you it will not be for nothing. The gathering began at midnight on June 3. Ezekiel was brought to the cellar by two brethren members who stripped him to the waist and bound his hands behind his back. They led him down the stairs into the candlelit chamber where all 13 members waited in their robes. Silas stood at the altar's head. Brothers of the harvest, tonight we conduct an initiation unlike any in our history. We bring into our circle a man who has every reason to despise us. A man who has lost everything because of what we represent. We do this to prove that our reach extends even to our enemies. That anyone can be drawn into the fold when the price is calculated correctly. He gestured. Two more brethren members brought forward a figure who was bound and gagged, struggling weakly in their grip. They placed her on the altar and stepped back. She was a young enslaved woman. Perhaps 18 or 19 years old. Terrified beyond words. This is your test, Ezekiel. Silas held his gaze. To join us you must take part in our ritual. You must take the knife and make the first cut. You must demonstrate that your desire for revenge against Gaines outweighs your moral objections to our methods. If you refuse, you die here tonight. If you accept, you become one of us. And we give you everything you need to destroy the men who killed your family. The other brethren members began a low rhythmic chanting in a language Ezekiel did not recognize. The candles guttered. Shadows surged across the walls. Silas extended the knife toward him. Long blade. Wickedly sharp. Handle wrapped in leather. Take it. Make the choice. Ezekiel looked at the young woman on the altar. She was crying behind the gag, trying to scream. Her eyes found his. And in them he saw every enslaved person who had ever suffered at the hands of men like these. He saw Sarah. He saw Benjamin. He saw Ruth. He saw himself. He looked at the knife. At Silas. At the 13 men watching to see what he would do. This was the moment. The point where he would either become a monster or die refusing. But there was a third option. One he had been constructing in his mind for 3 weeks. One that required absolute precision and absolute commitment. He took the knife. The brethren members exchanged approving nods. Silas allowed himself a small smile. The chanting intensified. Ezekiel stepped toward the altar. The young woman's eyes filled with terror. He raised the knife. And then he moved. Not toward her. Toward the nearest brethren member. The blade flashed in the candlelight and buried itself in the man's throat before anyone in the room could react. Blood sprayed. The men dropped. Ezekiel grabbed the fallen member's robe, tore it free in one motion, and threw it over the nearest cluster of candles. Half the chamber plunged into darkness. Chaos erupted. He moved through it like something concentrated and inevitable. Years of rage sharpened into action. He grabbed another man and used him as a shield as someone swung at him, threw the body into 2 more members and tangled them together, kicked hard into a knee and heard bone give, grabbed a candle holder and drove it into a face. The brethren were powerful men. But they were not fighters. They were soft. Privileged. Accustomed to other men carrying out violence on their behalf. Ezekiel was none of those things. He fought toward the altar, grabbed the young woman, and cut through her bonds with the knife he had somehow kept hold of. Run. He threw her toward the stairs. Run. She scrambled off the altar and fled upward. Ezekiel turned back to face what remained. 7 men still on their feet. Blocking the stairs. Blocking the exit. You have made a catastrophic mistake, Silas said, his voice still controlled despite the ruin around him. You have killed yourself and Catherine both. Perhaps. Ezekiel said. But I will take as many of you with me as I possibly can. What he did not know was that above him in the main house, Catherine had come back. She had never been on her way to Philadelphia. She had been hiding in the slave quarters, patient and purposeful, quietly gathering allies among the enslaved people of Cypress Grove. When she heard the sounds of violence rising from the cellar, when she saw the young woman burst screaming from the kitchen door, she knew the moment had arrived. Catherine had spent 3 weeks recruiting in secret. Moving from plantation to plantation under cover of darkness, speaking to enslaved people she had known her whole life, people who had watched her grow up and suffered under her father's ownership. She told them about the brethren, about the cellar, about the rituals. And she told them that tonight was the night it could end. 23 people came. Men and women who had exhausted the capacity to lose more. Who had given children to the brethren's rituals. Who had watched friends disappear without explanation into the surrounding swamps. Who had endured decades of brutality from men who had genuinely convinced themselves they were untouchable. They came carrying field tools. Axes, scythes, hammers. They came carrying rage that had been building across generations. When the young woman burst from the cellar entrance, Catherine led them down. The brethren members still focused on subduing Ezekiel did not hear them coming until it was already too late. The enslaved people flooded into the cellar like a tide that had been building for 40 years. What followed was without mercy. Without hesitation. These were people who had been told their entire lives that they were property. That their suffering was irrelevant. That their lives held no meaningful value. They were demonstrating exactly how wrong all of that had always been. The brethren tried to fight back. Judge Pelham drew a pistol but was cut down before he could fire it. Reverend Crenshaw dropped to his knees begging and received nothing. Marcus Fanning tried to push up the stairs and was dragged back down into the dark. Silas Ruddled, watching everything he had built collapse around him, tried one final desperate move. He seized Catherine, pulling her against him with a knife at her throat. Stop. Stop all of it or I cut her throat. The room went still. Catherine looked at her father with nothing resembling fear in her expression. Do it. Kill me. It changes nothing. You have already lost. I can still escape. I can still. You can still nothing. Catherine's voice was cold and absolute. You spent 16 years trying to break me. Trying to make me doubt everything I had seen and heard and knew. Trying to convince me I was mad. But you failed. I remembered everything. Every single thing. And I am going to stand here and watch you die. She drove her elbow back into his ribs with sudden vicious force. His grip loosened. She spun away from him. And before Silas could recover, Ezekiel was there between them. They faced each other. The enslaved man and the plantation owner. All the power Silas had gathered. All the privilege and cruelty and the decades of believing himself beyond consequence. None of it counted for anything now. You took everything from me, Ezekiel said quietly. My wife. My children. My life. You did it for no reason except that you could. To prove something to men who valued cruelty above humanity. Please. Just that one word from Silas. Soft and desperate and pathetic. Did my wife say please? Did my son? Did any of the people you killed on that altar? Ezekiel shook his head. No mercy. Not for you. Not ever. What happened next was brutal and final. The enslaved people made certain that none of the brethren left that cellar alive. 13 men who had spent decades believing themselves immune to consequence learned in their final moments that power was always an illusion. That cruelty always came back. That it always found its way home. When it was over, Catherine stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the bodies of 13 men. She was shaking. Not from fear. From release. 16 years of compressed rage finally given room. Ezekiel came to her. Are you hurt? No. Are you? Minor cuts. Nothing that will matter. He looked around at what surrounded them. What do we do now? Now. Catherine's smile was grim and exhausted. Now we burn it all. The cellar. The ledger. The evidence. Everything. We destroy every trace of what happened here tonight. But that evidence could prove what they did. Could bring real justice. Justice. She laughed, and there was nothing light in it. Ezekiel. Look around you. This is justice. The only kind we were ever going to be given. If we try to take that ledger to any authority, what actually happens? We are hunted. The remaining Brethren chapters in other counties come for us. This only ends if everyone believes the Cypress Grove chapter died in an accident. If there is no evidence, no surviving witnesses, no story that can be told. She was right. And Ezekiel knew it. Then we burn it. They spent the next 2 hours preparing. The enslaved people who had come to fight slipped away before dawn, returning to their various plantations. They would say nothing. They had seen nothing. They knew nothing. That was what survival looked like. Catherine and Ezekiel poured oil through the cellar, stacked wood and kindling, positioned the bodies in ways that might be read as accidental by anyone who looked later. Then they carried the ledger and every journal to the center of the altar. Wait, Ezekiel said. He opened the ledger one final time and found the 3 lines about his family. He carefully tore out those pages and folded them, placing them inside his shirt. For them. So they are not forgotten. Catherine nodded. Then she took a candle and touched it to the oil-soaked wood. The fire took hold immediately. Within minutes the cellar was fully ablaze. They ran up the stairs and out of the house and stood in the dark yard watching as the flames consumed Cypress Grove Plantation. People would come when they saw the smoke. There would be questions. But Catherine and Ezekiel had their story prepared. A terrible accident. A candle overturned in the cellar. The master and his guest trapped below before they could reach the stairs. So tragic. So terrible. No one would ever know the truth. As the sun broke over the burning ruins, Catherine turned to Ezekiel. What will you do now? Go north. Use the chaos of this fire to disappear. Find others who want to fight. Build a network that can help people reach safety. He held the folded paper with his family's names in his hand. I cannot bring them back. But I can make sure others do not suffer the same way. And I will go north as well. She looked at the fire. I will use the money I have been quietly moving out of my father's accounts for years. Start again somewhere else. She paused. But I will not forget any of this. I will write it all down. Every name. Every date. Every detail. So that someday, somehow, someone knows the truth. They will seal whatever records you try to submit. They will seal your testimony if you make it public. Then I will hide it. I will code it. I will leave it somewhere to be found decades from now when we are gone and it cannot be used against anyone who is still living. She looked at the fire one last time. The truth has a way of rising eventually. Even when people have worked hard to bury it. They stayed until the fire burned itself out. Until Cypress Grove Plantation was nothing but ash and blackened timber. Until nothing remained to suggest that 13 men had ever gathered there to commit atrocities. Then they walked away in opposite directions. Catherine north toward Charleston and eventually Philadelphia. Ezekiel west toward the frontier, where enslaved people could disappear into communities that asked no questions. They never saw each other again. The official story held exactly as they had planned it. A tragic accident. Silas Ruddle and 12 prominent gentlemen convened at Cypress Grove on a matter of business when a fire broke out. All 13 perished in the cellar, overcome before they could escape. A terrible loss for Colleton County. Funerals with full honors. Eulogies praising their contributions to society. Catherine Ruddled was listed among the dead as well. Her father's mad daughter, trapped in her room, unable to escape. A particularly sad footnote to an already terrible event. No one questioned it. No one looked closely. The enslaved people who had been there said nothing. They had no reason to speak and every reason to stay silent. Most were sold to different plantations within months as Cypress Grove was liquidated. They scattered across South Carolina and beyond, carrying their secret with them for the rest of their lives. Years passed. The ruins of Cypress Grove were eventually cleared. The land changed hands. New buildings rose on the ground. Life moved forward as it always does, laying new things over the old ones. But the whispers persisted. Stories passed in enslaved quarters late at night about the plantation where the masters burned. About the night justice found men who believed they were untouchable. About the woman and the men who made it happen. The stories shifted with every telling. They became legend. They became something close to myth. But the core of them never changed. Cruelty had consequences. Power was not absolute. And sometimes the people declared powerless found exactly where their power had always lived. In 1863, during the Civil War, Union troops moving through the area found evidence of old tunnels beneath where Cypress Grove had stood. They found bones in the surrounding swamp. They found markings on trees that pointed toward ritual sites. But the war did not slow down, and no one had time to pursue it further. In 1971, workers demolishing a structure in the area found a journal sealed inside a wall. It detailed everything. Names. Dates. Rituals. Victims. But as Catherine had always predicted, it was written in code. And before anyone could work through it fully, the journal vanished from county records. Some believe it was destroyed. Others believe it was taken by descendants of the Brethren's member families who still had something to protect. A few believe it still exists somewhere, waiting for the right moment to finally be found. What is confirmed is this. 13 prominent men died in a fire in 1841. Catherine Ruddled disappeared shortly after, though no body was ever confirmed. An enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross was reported sold to a plantation in Alabama, but no record of that transaction exists anywhere. And for years following the fire, stories circulated among enslaved communities about a network helping people escape north. Run by a man who had faced the worst kind of monster and walked away. Whether those stories were true or only the kind of hope people hold onto when they have little else, no one can say for certain. But sometimes truth does not live in official records. Sometimes it lives in the stories people choose to keep. In the memories they refuse to let go of. In the justice they hold onto, even when history decides it would rather forget. This story reminds us that power built on cruelty is never as solid as it appears. That secrets kept in darkness will eventually find light. That the people declared powerless often carry the most dangerous power of all. The power of witness. The power of memory. The power of refusing to forget. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything here was truly revealed? Do you think that journal still exists somewhere, waiting to be discovered? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this and want more dark historical mysteries like it, subscribe to Horror Echoes. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And share this video with someone who loves mysteries that blur the line between history and horror. These stories deserve to be remembered. These voices deserve to be heard. See you in the next one.